Boldwood presents The Dock Girl's Shame, written by AnneMarie Brear, and read by Dawn Murphy. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Wakefield, West Yorkshire, England. March 1871. Closing the ledger, Loretta Chambers, Lorrie to her friends, sat back and sighed. No matter how many times she added up the figures, the bottom line was always minus. Her father's business, Chambers Boat Builder and Repairs, was in deep trouble. She stared out of the window at the bustling boatyard edging the River Calder, where it swept in an arc near the weir. To her right was Wakefield Bridge, with the chantry chapel St Mary's perched beside it. On the left, on either side of the river, stood the docks and wharves, malt houses, all types of mills from cotton to corn and sawmills, plus the odd brewery, such as Henderson's Brewery, owned by Christian Henderson, the husband of her best friend Meg. The river itself held an array of vessels, the cargo barges and canal narrowboats, the repairs of which had kept her father in business for 25 years, a venture he'd taken over when she was only a baby. However, the busy waterways of the River Calder and the Calder and Hebble Navigation Canal, which cut through behind the mills beyond the boatyard, were dying. The railways had come and stolen the cargo from the canals, and each month that passed, Lorrie saw the fall in boats being brought in for repair, and even less call for new boats to be built. Her father, Ernest, kept denying the changes, saying work would pick up and ebbs and flows of business were to be expected. But Lorrie needed her father to see that the railways were affecting their income, and that the way they ran the boatyard needed to alter, or they could lose it altogether. They had an investor, Oswald Lynch, a man Lorrie disliked, but who had done a deal with her father to buy into the business. The investment money brought them some time. However, Lorrie felt it had simply delayed the business going broke completely. A tap on the office door preceded Jimmy, a young labourer who worked for her father.
"Sorry to disturb you, Miss Chambers, but your father wishes to know if the rope order has been sent off, as we're running low."
Lorrie forced a smile and pretended to look through the paperwork on her desk. "Tell father I'll double-check and come out to him."
"Right-yo, miss."
Jimmy closed the door, and Lorrie stopped moving the papers about. The rope order hadn't been sent off. She opened a drawer which held a wad of bills not attended to. The stack grew each day. How long could they hold off the inevitable? The door opened again, and her father, Ernest Chambers, stepped in, rubbing his hands from the cold. Spring warmth had yet to make an appearance, even if the daffodils were blooming.
"Dearest, the rope order?"
Father asked politely, as he did with everything. "You know we haven't paid the last bill," she reminded him. "They won't take another order until we do."
"Then pay 'em."
She stared at him in amazement. Did he not remember the conversation only 3 nights ago when she told him the money was all gone? "We have nothing to pay them with, Father, not until the Johnson invoice has been received. Did Mr. Johnson mention when he was paying us for the work on his boat?" Father, looking older than his 60 years, took off his hat and rubbed his sparse grey hair.
"Walter said he'd paid this week. Are we that short of money that we must wait for his payment to do anything else?"
"Yes." Lorrie stood and poked the coals in the little fire at the back of the office. "We spoke about this only a few nights ago."
"I don't understand it. Are you sure you're not mistaken? There has to be some money left."
She bristled. "Father, I have been doing the account book since I was 16. It is rare for me to make a mistake. I might be terrible at cooking and other things, but I know figures."
"And what of Oswald's investment?"
he asked of their partner. "It's nearly all gone. We have enough to pay the next month's wages." Lorrie kept her back to her father and added more coal on the fire. She didn't want him to see the revulsion she felt for Oswald. For the last 6 months since Oswald Lynch had invested in the boatyard, Lorrie had had to constantly hide her feelings towards the dreadful man. Her father had shaken his hand on a deal to invest in the business, but although the money had been welcome, Oswald's overzealous and obnoxious nature had become a problem, at least to Lorrie.
How can that be?
Father sat heavily on the wooden chair by the desk, his face pale, his shoulders drooped.
I promised Oswald a return on his money within a year.
I told you at the time you were setting yourself up for failure. Our trade has dropped in recent years.
You don't have to tell me that, dearest.
Then why did you make a deal with Mr. Lynch? She'd asked herself that question 100 times in the last few months, but never openly questioned her father, believing that there had been a suitable reason to go into further debt.
Modern ideas that could save us. Buying new equipment, taking on more men to do the jobs faster. It all sounded good on paper.
All of that would have worked if we had the work to show for it. Only we don't. Oswald's ability to find us more clients has failed so far. Lorrie went to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. We have to cut back on labour.
We need the men to finish the projects to bring the money in.
He lifted his hands in the air, as if in surrender. I understand that, but we need to lessen the number of wages we pay, Lorrie said with a little frustration. We must find ways to cut our costs, Father. She felt she was repeating herself at least daily, and yet her father never seemed to take it in.
Of course.
He stood and replaced his hat, and walked out of the office. Lorrie wondered if this time their talk might have had the desired effect, and her father would start to economise, but she doubted it. Leaving the office, she went outside and stood for a moment, watching the scene. Father had employed more men with Oswald's investment money than they'd ever had, and the yard resembled a thriving business. But she knew the truth. Seeing the workers happily whistling as they went about their tasks, or hearing the hammers hit wooden pegs into planks, or smelling the burning tar should have given her happiness, yet it kept her awake at night. The cold breeze had her pulling her shawl closer about her arms. The low grey sky threatened rain, and she hurried up the outside staircase to the living quarters above. Inside, she raked the main fire in the sitting room and added more coals, before doing the same to the cooking range fire in the kitchen. The living quarters boasted 2 bedrooms and 1 large room, which was the kitchen and sitting room combined. A mutton stew simmered on the range hob, and she tasted it with a spoon. It needed a touch more salt. Setting 2 places on the round table which sat in the middle of the room, Lorrie smoothed the red damask tablecloth, knowing it had belonged to her mother and was something her father held dear, as he did with anything that had belonged to her dark-haired and dark-eyed mother, Arianna. She remembered very little of her mother, who died when Lorrie was young. Father told her she came from an Italian family and had met her in London when he was an apprentice for a shipbuilder on the Thames. When he finished his apprenticeship and returned to Wakefield, he brought with him his young bride, much to her family's despair. Arianna died within 6 years of Lorrie's birth. Lorrie had been named after her Italian great-grandmother, Loretta, nor had she ever seen any of her mother's family. When her mother died, Ernest Chambers said he'd look after his own daughter, and he did. He employed a weekly cleaner and a cook who came to the flat 3 times a week until Lorrie was old enough at 12 to take over the running of their home, and a few years later, having a head for numbers, she started work in the office. Besides working in the office, Lorrie had attended a small, privately run girls' school. Miss Rogers in Westgate taught Lorrie to speak well and educated her enough to become a suitable wife for an upper working-class man, such as a clerk, or a scholar, or a solicitor if she was very fortunate. Years later, Lorrie still wondered when that man would enter her life. She longed to be married, to fall in love, and have a family of her own. For a while she thought that might be within reach. She had gone on a few walks with a kind man, Tobias Parker. But Tobias's interest waned when he saw that the boatyard was in fact a noose around Ernest's neck, and not a successful business he could take advantage of by marrying Lorrie. She should have been heartbroken when he stopped calling, but she wasn't. She wanted a heart-stopping love, the kind of adoration her friend Meg had with Christian, and would settle for nothing less. The door opened to voices, and Lorrie spun to see her father usher in Oswald Lynch.
"Lorrie, dear, set another place at the table. Oswald is joining us for our meal."
"This is an unexpected visit, Mr. Lynch." Lorrie wasn't expecting him until the end of the month.
"I could no longer deny myself the pleasure of your company, dear Miss Chambers."
Oswald, red-faced from climbing the stairs, bowed towards her as much as his rotund stomach would allow. Shorter than her father, who was only 5'9", Oswald had a proud manner, as though he was the son of a king, instead of the firstborn of a backstreet grocer. Words she had heard the men in the yard say about Mr. Lynch were not flattering, because he spoke down to them in the belief he was better than them.
"Sit, sit."
Father encouraged him to the sofa.
"Will we eat soon, daughter?"
"A few minutes. The stew is ready. I shall cut the bread." She busied herself at the small, square kitchen table, slicing the loaf, aware of Oswald's eyes watching her every move.
"The yard shows a hive of industry, Ernest," Oswald stated. "A fine sight to see indeed."
Father nodded enthusiastically.
"We have repairs aplenty. But do we have orders for new builds? Not these piddling little fixes."
Lorrie brought the bread to the table. "It is those little fixes that keep the yard afloat," she defended. Oswald's face brightened.
"I do so enjoy it when you interrupt our business talk, Miss Chambers, with your knowledge. I do forget that even though you are just a woman, you do have, remarkably, a brain in your head."
Lorrie bristled at the insult.
"My daughter is very much the centre of the business, Oswald. As you know, I am the one who oversees the yard, but Lorrie runs the office." "Yes, so I have learned."
He turned to look at her fully, his eyes narrowing like a hawk about to catch a mouse.
"Then you will be able to tell me when I shall get my first instalment of the profits."
Lorrie hated him for putting her on the spot. But before she could answer him with the unpalatable truth, Oswald laughed and slapped his thigh.
"Isn't she most delightful, Ernest? What a daughter you have. Beauty and mind. Some men would find that daunting, but not me. No, I admire such creatures."
She turned back to the kitchen side of the room and took bowls from a cupboard. Seething that he had demeaned her yet again, she took a deep breath to calm herself. The meal passed in general conversation about national events, such as the upcoming wedding of Princess Louise, Queen Victoria's daughter, to John Campbell, Marquess of Lorne, the unrest in Paris, and the news of the member states of North Germany joining with the southern German states to become a nation called the German Empire. When they had finished the meal, and her father and Oswald returned to the sofa to drink tea, Lorrie stayed in the kitchen to wash the dishes and tidy up. The conversation on the sofa was too low for her to hear, and that worried her. She didn't trust Oswald. He had pestered her father into investing in the business. That he owned a half share in the boatyard sat like a rock in her chest, suffocating her. Why he'd wanted to buy into a failing business, she didn't know. But there had to be a reason, and she wanted to find out what it was. Oswald took his leave shortly after.
"Thank you, Miss Chambers, for a lovely meal and your delightful company."
"You're welcome, Mr. Lynch." She forced a smile as he bent over her hand like a gallant knight.
"Until we meet again, which I hope is soon."
He went out with a chuckle. Lorrie glanced at her father as he put on his hat, ready to go back down to the yard. "Father, What were you both talking about just now?
Oswald has some cargo he wishes to send down the river, and asked my opinion of hiring a boat or buying his own. I told him I have a couple of my own boats in the yard that, once repaired, he can use.
The ones you use for scrap parts?
Yes. If it keeps him sweet, I can repair one for him to use as he pleases.
At the door, he paused.
Oswald has a keen interest in you, dearest. I would hazard a guess he's thinking of marriage.
Not with me, she blurted out in shock.
Of course with you. Why wouldn't he? You are beautiful and clever. You'd make any man a fine wife.
Except him.
Don't be too hasty, Lorrie dear. He may be the answer to our prayers.
I say no prayers which include Oswald Lynch, father. He let out a long sigh.
Then perhaps you should.
He softly closed the door behind him. Lorrie stared into nothingness. Marriage to Oswald Lynch? She'd rather die. Chapter 2. After shaking Mr. Rendale's hand, the vicar of the church she attended on the other side of the river, Lorrie hurried up to catch her friend Fliss Atkins, while father spoke to old friends.
Lorrie.
Fliss embraced her.
I'm sorry I couldn't come for afternoon tea yesterday. My aunt is in bed with a dreadful cold, and I had to wait on her.
You look tired, Lorrie commented, noticing the darkness under Fliss's blue eyes. Even her freckles seemed faded today. Are you unwell?
No, I'm fine. I'm just exhausted from looking after Aunt and then working my shifts behind the bar.
She spoke of her uncle's public house, the Bay Horse, where Fliss lived and worked. Have you seen Meg at all? Lorrie asked. Last I heard, she was going to Huddersfield to visit Mabel and the baby who was sick. She had kept her voice low, for Meg's 16-year-old sister, Mabel, had found herself pregnant and unmarried. Meg and her brother Freddie had sent her away to have the baby.
You haven't heard?
Fliss whispered. No. What?
Freddie came into the bar last night to tell me that he and Meg had just returned from Huddersfield. Mabel's baby girl died a few hours before they arrived.
Oh, no. Lorrie's heart broke for them. Poor Mabel.
The funeral was yesterday, and they brought Mabel home with them afterwards. None of them have come to church this morning.
Fliss.
Freddie said he had failed as a brother, but how can he blame himself? It wasn't his fault his sister got into trouble, or that her baby died.
Perhaps it is fate, Lorrie murmured sadly. Mabel can get on with the rest of her life now, without the torture of giving up her baby, and knowing it was living out there somewhere without her. Fliss nodded.
Mabel's young. She can start again. Though Freddie will keep a close eye on her now. No more messing about with lads for a few years.
Indeed. Though how he'll be able to do that when he is a landlord of a pub and men are in and out day and night, I don't know. Lorrie nodded to her father, who had finished his conversations. I'd best go.
Me too. My aunt will be wanting me.
Fliss grasped Lorrie's hand.
Meg will be needing us.
Yes. I'll send her a note to come for tea one day this week. What day suits you?
Thursday. My aunt should be well enough by then.
Fliss stiffened as her cousin Gerald came up to her, scowling.
Hurry up. Father and I are waiting for you.
He didn't acknowledge Lorrie.
Sorry.
Fliss's gaze dropped to the ground.
Bye, Lorrie.
Until Thursday, then. Lorrie smiled at Fliss before giving Gerald a glare, hating how he always ordered Fliss about like a servant. Walking home with her father, Lorrie tucked her arm through his. She enjoyed Sunday afternoons, the only time they were alone together. The yard commanded all of her father's time, and when he'd finished for the day, he was usually exhausted and fell asleep before the fire. She spent most evenings in silence, reading or sewing, while her father gently snored in his chair. However, Sunday afternoons she could cajole him into a walk or, if the weather was bad, a game of cards. "Shall we be extravagant and go to the theatre one night this week?" He chuckled.
You're the one saying we should watch our spending, and now you want a trip to the theatre?
A flare of guilt sparked, but she quickly squashed it. "It's rare that we treat ourselves, Father. Can we, just this once, do something that is nice for the two of us?" In truth, she felt that if the boatyard went under, they would never go to the theatre again.
Dearest, if that is what you want to do, then we will.
He patted her hand where it rested on his arm. Excitement made her grin. "I'll go into town tomorrow and buy the tickets." Entering the boatyard's iron gates, they paused on seeing a man. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked her father.
No, not on a Sunday.
Father quickened his step.
Good day, sir. How may I help you?
Lorrie's footsteps slowed as she neared the man. He was tall, lithe, and when he took off his hat, the sun shone off black hair, as dark as a raven's wing, like her own.
Good day, Mr. Chambers.
The man held out his hand, and Father shook it. Then the man gazed at Lorrie for a long moment.
Miss Chambers.
He bowed. For some strange reason, Lorrie's heartbeat doubled in time. The man was handsome, with classic Latin looks, dark hair, dark eyes, and tanned skin, as though he spent all his time outdoors. But his suit was well made and of good quality, so he wasn't a labourer looking for work. "And you are?" Lorrie blurted out. Something about him raised the hairs on the back of her neck.
Matteo Falcone. Italian, Father said, stiffening beside her. Yes.
The stranger bowed his head to her father.
You married a member of my my great-grandmother's family.
His accent was slight but detectable, as if he'd spent many years away from his home country.
My wife is dead, Father told him. I wrote to Arianna's family many years ago.
Shocked that not only was an Italian standing before her, but that he was related in some distant way to her own mother, left Lorrie reeling. She had never seen anyone from her mother's side of the family.
And the family have wondered how her daughter has fared since then.
The man's dark gaze strayed to Lorrie. Shall we go inside? Lorrie led the way upstairs and unlocked the door. She took off her coat, gloves, and unpinned her hat, all while aware of the handsome stranger who stood just inside the doorway. Please, come and sit by the fire. She hurried over and raked up the coals, adding bits of wood to get the blaze going.
Why are you here?
Father took over the concerns of the fire, while Lorrie went into the kitchen and did the same to the range fire. While she tended to the tea things, she kept glancing over to the man, listening to every word.
My great-grandmother was an important friend and distant cousin to your late wife's grandmother, Loretta. My great-grandmother has sent me on this errand to visit you while I was in England on business.
Why now? Lorrie took a step from the table, eager to hear any.
Your great-grandmother.
He bowed his head for a moment and then stared at her.
Loretta died recently. She was of a good age, lived a good life. She always talked about you and wondered how you were.
Sorry that her great-grandmother had died, but not sad, for the woman had barely registered in Lorrie's life. She folded her hands and tried to make sense of his visit. My great-grandmother never wrote to me.
Her English was very poor.
None of my mother's side of the family wrote or visited me. That fact hurt, no matter how old she became. She knew she had relatives in London, yet had never seen them.
I am sorry for that.
Her hands trembled a little as she placed the tea things on the table. So why have you come, and not a member of my mother's family?
My great-grandmother sent me. She promised your great-grandmother she would do so because of their lifelong friendship. I am honoring that promise.
To see if I'm alive? Lorrie shrugged. Why do they care now? Father straightened as much as his slightly stooped back would allow.
Well, you've seen my daughter, and she is well. You have fulfilled your promise and can leave.
Father? Lorrie admonished. She'd never heard him, a quiet and kind man, speak so rudely. Father held his hands up.
I'm sorry, Lorrie, but I want nothing to do with that family. I didn't back then, and I definitely don't now. I was told there is,
Mr. Falcone seemed to search for the right word in English.
Bad blood between you and your wife's family.
Bad blood? Lorrie stared, wide-eyed at her father. She knew nothing of that. Mr. Falcone gave her a small smile of sympathy.
It is not my story to tell.
Besides being intrigued by this family history, Lorrie wondered where he had learned to speak such good English.
No, it damn well isn't.
Father turned away to gaze at the fire.
I want you to leave, please. Very well.
Mr. Falcone bowed his head, then looked at Lorrie.
I have something for you. From Loretta. Perhaps I can call tomorrow and give it to you? I did not bring it with me in case you weren't living in this place. She needs nothing from you, or them, Father said, not looking at him. That is Miss Chambers' choice, yes?
Mr. Falcone's dark eyes were tender. In the silence of the large room, Lorrie sucked in a breath. What had just happened? Her mother had died when she was a child. Pneumonia, Father had told her. Arianna hadn't ever adapted to the bleak and damp northern weather. Arianna was a lover of the sun and warmth. Yorkshire didn't provide enough of that for her to enjoy, Father said, and Arianna missed her family in London. Her spirit eroded over the years, and she grew unhappy. That last bit of information came from Jed, the old man who worked in the yard and who had seen all of this unfold. Lorrie could only remember little pieces of her mother. Her long black hair, which hung in a plait as thick as her father's ropes. She remembered odd Italian words her mother would say to her, such as tesoro and amorino. What they meant, Lorrie didn't know. But the main thing she remembered was her mother singing as she cooked on the same range Lorrie now cooked at. Her mother always sang in Italian, even though she'd been born in London. Lorrie wished she remembered the words.
You're not to see that man again. Do you hear? Father said.
His voice no longer angry, just determined. But he's coming back tomorrow with a gift from my great-grandmother. Lorrie badly wanted to see the gift, to connect in some small way with the woman who gave birth to her own mother's mother. All these faceless women who were her blood.
You don't need anything from that family.
Father went into his bedroom and quietly closed the door. For a long moment, Lorrie stared at the closed door. It was rare for them to have a crossword. It had been just the two of them for so long, and they always got along with each other. Only this link with the past, a past Lorrie knew nothing about, had rattled her father. As she put away the tea things, she thought of Matteo Falcone, and although it was a betrayal to her dear father, she knew she would see him again. The following morning, Lorrie tidied the office. Her father had a bad habit of looking for paperwork and leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. She needed to keep busy as she waited for Mr. Falcone to arrive, which she hoped he would, and hadn't been put off by her father's rudeness. She'd spent a restless night thinking about him, and her Italian family, and her mother, but mainly about him. Matteo Falcone. Such an exotic name, at least for these parts, where there were so many common names like John, Charlie, Tom, and Harry. The office door opened, only for the smile to turn into a grimace on seeing Oswald Lynch enter.
"Good morning, Miss Chambers."
"Mr. Lynch?" She nodded to him and continued sorting out her piles of paperwork.
"Is your father about?"
"He'll be in the yard somewhere. They were bringing in a boat from the river." She waved towards the small window which overlooked the yard and down to the river. "They'll be dry docking it for repairs."
"Whose boat is it?"
Lorrie opened the repair ledger and scanned the list to the bottom. "Mr. Cameron's. He has sent his barge in for new caulking."
"Good, good. I spoke to your father about him."
Oswald rubbed his hands together.
"This is good business."
Lorrie studied the client's details in the ledger. "Mr. Cameron is paying under the going rate father would normally charge for caulking." Oswald gave her a superior look.
"In these difficult times, we must give special deals wherever we can."
"Not to the extent of going under, surely." Lorrie closed the ledger.
"It'll not come to that, my dear. We have plenty of business happening."
Lorrie shuddered, disliking it when he called her "my dear." She wasn't his anything. "Business you have sent our way?"
"Indeed. What are partners for?"
"But since you have invested, our prices have been lowered."
"And you've become busier," he gloated.
"We are rushing through the jobs. The workmanship will suffer without the care and attention to detail father is known for."
"Standards are still high, Miss Chambers. Do not worry your pretty little head about that."
She clenched her fists. How would he know about their standards? Was he a boatwright?
"I was thinking that perhaps you would enjoy a night at the theatre. Your father mentioned it is a treat you much appreciate."
His slimy smile showed his small teeth, reminding her of a rat.
"I can purchase tickets for Friday?"
"Forgive me, Mr. Lynch, but that is not something I would be keen to do."
"Why?"
He blinked rapidly in surprise. "It is hardly respectable, the two of us alone at the theatre."
"You want a chaperone?"
His beady eyes widened.
"At your age, I highly doubt that is necessary."
Stung, she lifted her chin. "I am only 25, Mr. Lynch, not in my dotage yet."
"But time is getting away from you, Miss Chambers. Most women your age are married and have children by now. Surely you wish for that too."
"No, not really," she lied. She'd never tell him the truth that she longed for a husband and a baby, but the scarcity of suitable men she admired had her doubting she'd ever be married with children to love.
"Come, every woman wants a wedding and a home of their own."
He waved his hands dismissively at her.
"I would quite happily court you, Miss Chambers. I believe I could offer you a pleasant life as my wife."
"Thank you," Lorrie murmured, embarrassed he'd put her in such an awkward situation. "However, I will only marry for love, Mr. Lynch."
"You could grow to develop feelings,"
he whined. "I very much doubt it, but thank you for the offer." He stiffened, obviously unused to not getting what he wanted.
"Think about it, Miss Chambers. There is no rush, is there?"
He bowed and walked out. Exhaling deeply, Lorrie collapsed into the office chair by her desk. Every time Oswald was about, she felt her shoulders tighten. The door opened and father came in, wearing a puzzled expression.
"Was that Oswald? He didn't stay to speak to me."
"He did come to see you, but instead asked me to marry him, or at least consider it. I've turned him down."
"Oh dear, poor fellow. That can't have been very nice for him."
"You won't push me into marrying him, will you, father?"
"Not if it's not what you want. Although it could provide you with a comfortable life, dearest."
"No, father. Please don't try to convince me that Mr. Lynch is right for me. He isn't. He's not the man for me." She smiled to lighten the atmosphere. How did the docking go?
Fine. As expected.
He searched through the paperwork on her desk.
The last order from the timber merchants, did it include trennels?
Yes. Why?
Cameron's boat is carvel built, not clinker. The trennels need replacing, and I don't think we have enough.
Why have you quoted a lower price for Mr. Cameron?
He's a friend of Oswald's, and we're doing it cheaper as a favour to Oswald.
Why? Surely he wants more profits.
Cameron is his friend.
Father shrugged uncaringly.
Cameron can put more work our way. His brother works at Stanley Ferry boatyard. They can send us boats for repairs that they don't have time to do.
At a lower price?
Work is work, daughter.
Lorrie said no more about it. She didn't trust Oswald, but Father did, and nothing would convince him otherwise. The sound of wagon wheels crunching, a delivery of timber planks on the back of a wagon, needed unloading and checking. Lorrie knew this would be the last order from this particular sawmill until they paid an outstanding invoice. While Father went to see it, Lorrie went up the outside stairs to their living rooms above. "I'll make us some tea, Father." He turned and gave her a nod of thanks, just as Matteo Falcone walked through the gates. Lorrie's stomach swooped when Mr. Falcone smiled at her. She crossed the yard to him, knowing Father watched her with a frown. "You came," she said unnecessarily.
I said I would.
Dressed all in black except his snow-white shirt, Mr. Falcone stood a head taller than every man working in the yard. All eyes were on him, the stranger. "Would you like to come inside?" She gripped her hands, alarmed that they trembled slightly. No one had affected her like this before. Her senses were instantly alert, and the hairs on the back of her neck rose.
"Thank you, but only for a moment, while I give you this."
He tapped the brown paper-wrapped parcel he held.
"Then perhaps we may go for a walk, if your father approves."
Giddy at the thought of spending time alone with him, Lorrie didn't give a fig if her father approved or not. She'd always been the dutiful daughter, but instinct told her that Mr. Falcone was worth the risk of her father's displeasure. "Bring it inside, and I'll make us a cup of tea." Breathless and fizzing with excitement, she led the way over to the staircase. Suddenly, an almighty crack echoed around the yard. Halfway up the stairs, Lorrie stared down at the wagon as the ropes holding the tall pile of timber planks snapped, one after the other. Frightened by the whip-crack sound, the two draft horses jibbed and pranced, dislodging the load. The driver yelled, racing back to hold the head of the horses, but they shied and stomped. One plank fell off the wagon, and then, like a waterfall, the rest followed. "Father!" Lorrie screamed as her father tried to move out of the way. But he wasn't quick enough. The planks knocked him to the ground, and then buried him. She screamed again, slipping and tripping down the stairs. Mr. Falcone grabbed her arm and lifted her down. She sprinted to the pile of wood, as did the men from the yard. "Get him out!" Lorrie pulled at the long, heavy planks closest to her.
"Ye gods,"
Jed muttered, before quickly pulling the top planks off. Mr. Falcone, the men joining in, while the wagon driver did his best to calm the horses. It seemed to take forever before they revealed her father's head. He moaned, and Lorrie fell to her knees beside him. "Can you hear me, Father?" He grunted in response, a spasm of pain flickering over his face. "Jimmy, run for the doctor. Hurry!" Lorrie told the youth. Mr. Falcone worked non-stop on the pile with the other men, heaving the planks away from Ernest Chambers' body. Lorrie used her own handkerchief to wipe the dust and blood from her father's face. "You'll soon be free, Father."
"My legs,"
he croaked.
"They feel like they're on fire."
"It's the pain. You'll be free in a minute.
and then we'll get you comfortable upstairs."
Lorrie, dear girl.
His eyes closed. She shook his shoulders, a scream buried in her throat. "Father, stay awake!" Chapter 3. Father's eyes fluttered open, the pain biting deep.
"I can't, lass.
"Of course you can. Look at me, and don't worry about anything else. That's all you have to do." She smiled lovingly into his face. "Hold my hand. That's it." She squeezed his fingers gently.
"He's free,"
Mr. Falcone puffed, coming to her side.
"We need to carry him upstairs and stop that bleeding."
His accent became stronger under stress.
"I'll find a flat board to put him on,"
Jed said, wiping the sweat from his brow.
"No, the staircase is too steep."
Mr. Falcone bent beside Lorrie.
"We'll have to carry him up ourselves."
His gaze travelled down to Ernest's legs, which were bleeding through the material of his torn trousers.
"This is going to hurt him,"
he warned her. Lorrie patted her father's hand. "Mr. Falcone and Jed and the others will lift you and take you upstairs."
"No."
"They must get you inside." She stepped back as the men gathered around him. Gently as they could, they picked him up off the ground. But father still yelled out in agony and then promptly passed out.
"That's good. He's out. Let's be quick about it."
Mr. Falcone took charge, and the men crab-crawled sideways to the staircase with her father hanging between them. Dashing away her tears, Lorrie raced ahead of them up the stairs and into the living room. For a moment she dithered, overcome with indecision. Then she took a deep breath and focused. Her father's bed would need stripping. She worked quickly, just managing to place newspapers and the old blankets over the mattress as the men brought father into the bedroom. Lorrie stared at the blood spreading dark stains on his trousers. Father's face was cut and bleeding on the forehead and cheek, but it was his legs that Lorrie knew had suffered the worst.
"Warm water, Miss Chambers,"
Mr. Falcone said calmly.
"The doctor will need to clean his wounds. And scissors to cut his trousers." "We need to stop the bleeding," Jed mumbled. "Towels, strips of cloth, miss."
"Yes, I have bandages in the office too." She darted from the bedroom to the kitchen. In the top drawer she found scissors and then grabbed towels from a cupboard and took them into the bedroom. Mr. Falcone wrapped the towels around each leg. Lorrie rushed back to the kitchen to put the kettle on the range to heat up. She needed more water. The bucket was empty.
"Give it to me."
Mr. Falcone came across the room and took the bucket from her.
"Where is the tap?"
"Down in the yard, near the office window."
"Here, I'll get it."
Jed led the other two men from the room, taking the bucket with him.
"I'll get the bandage box from the office too."
Lorrie added more coal to the range fire, cursing that she'd let it get so low.
"Go and sit with your father."
Mr. Falcone took the small coal shovel from her hand.
"I'll see to the water."
Emotion clogged her throat as she looked at him. His tender gaze made the tears burn hot behind her eyes. He gently touched her arm in comfort, and she fought the urge to step closer to him, badly needing him to embrace her. Instead, she spun on her heel and went back into the bedroom. Her father lay grey-faced on the bed, his breathing shallow. She took a chair from under the window and placed it beside the bed. She took his hand, careful not to touch where the skin was cut. "Hold on, father. The doctor will be here soon and make you better." Jed came in with a box of bandages and a bowl of water.
"Hey, I'm not sorry, miss."
Jed gave her the box. "Will you wait downstairs for the doctor and show him up, please?" She soaked a bandage in water.
"Aye, miss."
Left alone, Lorrie bent closer to her dear father. "You're going to be fine." She blinked away tears. "You can't leave me. You're all I have." Her words caught in her throat. Gently, she cleaned away the blood on his face. But his cheek was more of a graze now she could see it properly with the blood wiped away. It seemed hours before the doctor arrived, but was no more than 20 minutes.
"The doctor is here."
Mr. Falcone stood in the doorway, moving aside for Dr. Carter to enter the room.
"Now, young Jimmy has informed me of what's occurred, Miss Chambers. Leave me to see your father with just another man to help, if you please."
He kindly patted her shoulder as she stood. She nodded. "I'll see to the water." The doctor took off his coat.
"I'll need a good supply of it by the looks of it." "Shall I stay with your father?"
Mr. Falcone asked Lorrie. "I think he would prefer Jed, if you don't mind." She knew her father would hate to be undressed in front of Mr. Falcone, and he'd known Jed for 25 years.
"Of course."
Mr. Falcone walked out with her. Lorrie heated more water from the buckets Jed had brought up. She spilt more than she poured into the pans and jerked back in surprise when Mr. Falcone took the bucket from her and finished the task.
"Sit,"
he said gently.
"You've had a shock. Do you have brandy?"
"No." Lorrie clasped her hands together and glanced worriedly at the closed bedroom door. "He can't die on me. He's all I have," she murmured. Jimmy knocked and entered, carrying Mr. Falcone's coat and a brown paper-wrapped parcel.
"I found these in the yard, miss."
"Thank you, Jimmy." Lorrie took them from him.
"Any news?"
"Not yet. Your speed at fetching the doctor was vital. Thank you." He flushed at the praise.
"I was lucky to find the doctor quickly. He was on Doncaster Road. The men are continuing to work. We don't want to let you or Mr. Chambers down by standing around doing naught."
Lorrie touched his arm. "Thank them for me, will you?"
"Aye, miss."
He went out and closed the door. She turned to Mr. Falcone, who was in the process of adding sugar to a teacup. "Your coat and parcel."
"Today has not been as I expected."
He brought over a cup of tea for her. "No, nor me." She sat at the table, sick with worry.
"I had plans for us to talk a great deal."
He sat opposite her, his dark eyes full of sympathy, his tone caring. "I would have liked that."
"There will be another opportunity. First, your father's health is more important."
She couldn't help saying. He smiled.
"I was sent to this country to be educated when I was 14.
Frowning, Lorrie sipped her tea. "Father told me that my mother's family were poor. They lived in London's East End."
"Yes, they were. My family weren't. Our great-grandmothers were cousins. That is the connection between my family and your mother's. However, my father's side of the family was not poor. We have been craftsmen for generations, but also scholars and statesmen."
"Oh." She tried to concentrate on what he had to say, to learn more from him. However, her brain refused to work properly.
"Would you care to know more about my family?"
He gave a wry smile.
"I can stay quiet if you'd rather have some peace, or I can leave."
"No, please stay. I would like to know more about you and your family, and my mother's as well." She wanted to learn more about him, and it would also take her mind off her father.
"My grandfather has 11 children, 7 of them sons. My country has been fighting for centuries, and with the constant wars of independence within itself. My grandfather sent 6 of his sons to other parts of the world to live and raise their families away from the fighting. My father, the eldest, he kept in La Spezia."
"La Spezia? Is that where you're from?" Despite her worry, Lorrie was interested.
Si, yes,
he smiled. A deep moan came from the bedroom. Lorrie jerked to her feet. Mr. Falcone stood as well.
Do you want me to check for you?
I want to see for myself. She marched to the bedroom and, without hesitating, opened the door. The smell of blood hit her first, thick and cloying. The sight of so many red-stained cloths on the floor made her reel. Dr. Carter glanced over his shoulder.
Good. Another pair of hands. Hold your father's shoulders down, Miss Chambers. You, sir, come hold his other leg.
He nodded to Mr. Falcone. Lorrie slipped to the top end of the bed. Her father's face was covered in sweat, his eyes firmly closed, his lips pressed together as he fought the pain. I'm here, father. She placed her hands on his shoulders as he writhed.
I need to straighten these bones, Dr. Carter mumbled, his fingers coated in blood as he manipulated the left. The right leg is in better shape than the left. The right leg has a sprained ankle, cuts and bruises. I fear the left leg is far more damaged. His fibula is broken. That is the snapped bone we see there, Dr. Carter murmured, as if speaking to himself. I need to straighten it into place, close the wound, and splint the leg.
A groan escaped father's throat. Lorrie focused on his white face, not wanting to see the doctor move skin, muscle and bone as easily as if he was a butcher cutting up a carcass. Lorrie lost track of time as the doctor worked. Father went in and out of consciousness, and when he was out, Lorrie fetched clean towels and more water. By late afternoon, everyone was exhausted, especially Dr. Carter. After securing the final bandage, the doctor wiped his brow, his white apron streaked in red.
That is done to the best of my skills, Miss Chambers.
He untied the strings of his filthy apron and took it off.
Mr. Chambers will no doubt get a fever from infection, for it was an open wound. I cannot rule out possible gangrene and amputation. I am preparing you.
He sighed tiredly.
Shock may finish him yet. I am surprised his heart did not give out today. The loss of blood was considerable.
The list of problems overwhelmed her. Father is strong, and I will care for him.
And those two things still might not be enough.
The doctor cleaned his tools in yet another bucket of water that Jimmy had been delivering to the bedroom door on a regular basis for hours. Mr. Falcone took out another bucket of red-stained water while Jed collected the soiled clothes. Burn them, Jed. I'll never get the stains out.
Aye, miss.
Then get yourself home. Tell everyone to go home. She gave him a grateful smile.
Right you are, miss.
Dr. Carter shrugged on his coat.
I will return in the morning, early.